There is a strange kind of danger that hides behind a smile, and danger that doesn't come from cruelty or evil or even intent. It's the danger of stupidity, not the haha stupidity that becomes a meme, but the quiet, unconscious ignorance that can wreck lives, topple institutions, ruin families, all without an ounce of awareness. And the most terrifying part? It doesn't feel malicious. It feels ordinary. It feels harmless. Sometimes it even feels kind. The Italian philosopher and resistance fighter Carlo Cipolla once proposed a theory so unsettling that it practically offends our modern optimism. He believed that stupid people, not evil people, are the fundamental threat to civilization. Evil people have a motive. With effort, they can be resisted, but the stupid, they act without logic or self-awareness, and in doing so, they cause harm to both themselves and others, consistently, blindly, endlessly. Nietzsche warned of a similar blindness when he spoke of the herd instinct, how people will follow the crowd without ever examining why. Some might dismiss this as elitist, but when we look honestly, we see it everywhere. A colleague who unwittingly undermines a project, a government decision made without thought to consequence, a friend whose reckless behavior burns everyone around them. It's not simply ignorance, it's a kind of anti-wisdom. In this video, I want to explore why stupidity, not cruelty, may be the force that truly shapes history, and more importantly, how we can respond. We'll uncover 6 radical insights, grounded in philosophy and psychology, that may change the way you see the people around you and yourself. Why stupidity is predictable and more powerful than malice. How ignorance multiplies more efficiently than wisdom. Why intelligence doesn't protect you from being stupid. Why the harmless can still be devastating. How we participate in the problem without realizing it. And how to build a mind that resists the gravitational pull of stupidity, beginning with humility. By the end, my hope is that you'll walk away not defeated, but wiser, a little more protected, a little more awake, and perhaps with the courage to stand as one of the few who truly see. A rumor begins with a whisper. A false headline circulates. A careless opinion, unexamined, gets repeated at a dinner table, then passed along in a classroom, then echoed on social media until it feels like truth. Meanwhile, a thoughtful idea, carefully researched, painfully nuanced, sits alone in a book no one has time to read. It's a strange law of human behavior. The things that require the least effort to understand are the fastest to spread, and most of the time those things are not wisdom. They are simplistic, misleading, or just plain wrong. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once wrote, "There are very many men of the broadest intelligence who are very ignorant, and many of great knowledge who are very narrow-minded." His point was simple. Knowledge and truth do not possess any natural advantage in the world. They require work, discipline, patience. In contrast, ignorance is effortless, it's spontaneous, fast-moving, emotionally satisfying, and in groups, highly contagious. Consider how quickly a bad idea can go viral. Think of one sensational lie, one piece of gossip, or one poorly researched fact thrown into the air. It spreads like fire because it takes no effort to repeat it. It asks nothing of us. It doesn't demand reflection, only reaction. The brain loves shortcuts, and stupidity offers them generously. This is why mass movements Hateful ideologies and bizarre conspiracies can spread at light speed, while serious truth moves like a tortoise dragging a heavy shell. Social psychologists call this cognitive ease. The more familiar and easy something feels, the more we trust it, regardless of whether it's true. That's why stupidity multiplies. Because it feels easy, it feels familiar, it asks nothing of us, and in a world flooded with noise, we gravitate toward what's most effortless. In his reflections on crowd behavior, psychologist Gustave Le Bon argued that individuals often lose their critical faculties in a group. He observed how the crowd lowers our standards of thought. The crowd is intellectually inferior to the isolated individual. In other words, the moment we surrender our individual thinking to the collective, we become more susceptible to stupidity, not because we've gotten less intelligent, but because we've stopped thinking for ourselves. Now think about modern life, algorithms that show you what you already believe, news streams that reward outrage over nuance, a never-ending scroll of content designed not to make you think, but to keep you engaged. It's no surprise that stupidity spreads faster than wisdom. The entire structure of the modern world, socially, technologically, economically, is built to reward ease over effort. This is not new, but it is accelerating. And yet, we often blame individuals. People are idiots. Society is dumb. But perhaps the deeper problem is structural. We have created systems that favor the rapid reproduction of shallow thinking. Stupidity isn't just a personal flaw, it's become a collective mechanism. So what do we do with that? We start by noticing how easily we pass things along without reflection, forwarding an article we didn't read, repeating an opinion we heard, sharing a piece of news because it confirmed what we already believed. Every time we do that, we become carriers of a virus, not of evil, but of unexamined stupidity. There's a reason wisdom feels slow. It's because it requires digestion. It asks us to feel discomfort, to sit with uncertainty, to consider the possibility that we might be wrong. It doesn't spread as fast, but when it does take root, it's powerful. One thoughtful, awakened person can counter 1,000 mindless voices. So the challenge becomes, are you willing to choose the harder path? Are you willing to slow down, question, verify, reflect, even when the world around you doesn't? Because stupidity is a flood. Wisdom is a seed. One pours over everything in an instant. The other must be planted, watered, protected. But in time, it can grow into something that changes an entire landscape. If this resonates with you, take a moment to subscribe. We dive into questions like this every week, patiently, relentlessly, because the world needs more thinkers, not echo chambers. The question is, will you be part of the flood or part of the foundation? She was a quiet woman in her late 50s, friendly, soft-spoken, the kind of neighbor you'd trust to water your plants or bring you soup when you're sick. No one would call her dangerous. If anything, they would say she was kind. And yet, for years, she worked as a clerk in a system that processed orders, leading to the violent removal of families from their homes. She never pulled a trigger. She never raised her voice. She simply filed documents, followed procedures, and did her job efficiently. She would return home in the evening, make tea, read a book. But the consequences of her harmless actions were catastrophic. This, according to political philosopher Hannah Arendt, is the terrifying lesson buried in history. It is not always the monstrous villains who create the greatest destruction. It is the everyday person who never questions their role, who obeys, who normalizes the abnormal, who sees only a desk, a list, a task. Arendt called this the banality of evil. After observing the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a bureaucrat who organized the logistics of the Holocaust, she noted how disturbingly ordinary he seemed, not a frothing villain, just a man who insisted he was following orders. The point here is not that every compliant worker is supporting atrocity. Rather, it is that passivity and obedience can become dangerous forces when combined with systems that do harm. And most of that harm is done by people who see themselves as good, polite, harmless. We often think that as long as a person's intentions are kind, the outcome must be harmless. But history and daily life prove otherwise. The teacher who refuses to intervene when a student is bullied, the colleague who stays silent when corruption happens at work, the friend who doesn't want drama while someone else is being mistreated. None of these people are evil. Yet their silence, their compliance, their avoidance have consequences. Philosopher John Stuart Mill once said, "Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing." Why is this so relevant to stupidity? Because when we assume danger looks evil, we ignore the far more common danger, the thoughtless, the indifferent, the nice but disengaged. They don't mean harm, which is precisely why they feel harmless. This illusion allows structures of harm to flourish unchecked. We are surrounded by people who consider themselves good simply because they never actively harm, yet they never take responsibility for the harm happening through them. And here's where it gets personal. How many times have we done the same? We've rationalized inaction. We've convinced ourselves it's not our business. We've said, "I don't want to get involved." We've chosen comfort over courage and called it peace. This is not about guilt. It's steps about awakening. Because the moment we realize that being harmless is not the same as doing no harm, we begin to see our moral responsibility in a new light. We begin to recognize that silence, neutrality, passivity, these are not neutral. They are choices. And in a world where harm happens every day, those choices either slow down the damage or allow it to grow. So the invitation here is not to become heroic or perfect, but simply more conscious, to notice when being nice is really just a disguise for fear or apathy, to understand that danger doesn't always look like a villain. Sometimes it looks like someone who smiles, nods, files the papers, and goes home. There's a strange comfort in blaming the world's problems on villains. We like to imagine that danger always has sharp teeth, a sinister face, but the truth, as we've seen, is far more unsettling. The greatest threats often come from the ordinary, the unaware, the well-intentioned, and sometimes from within ourselves. Stupidity, in Cipolla's terms, is the force that harms without reason, without awareness, consistently and without warning. And when we look honestly at life, we realize this force is everywhere, but it is not hopeless. If anything, recognizing the nature of this danger is the beginning of real strength. Let's remember what we have uncovered. The most dangerous people are not the evil ones, they're the unaware ones. Because harm without awareness is unpredictable and unstoppable. Stupidity spreads faster than wisdom, fueled by ease, repetition, and the human desire for simplicity. Intelligence does not protect us from stupidity. In fact, it can make us even more vulnerable if it feeds the ego and blinds us to our own faults. The harmless can still cause catastrophe. Ordinary people doing ordinary things can become pillars of destructive systems simply by refusing to think. We all participate in collective stupidity, not out of malice, but out of conformity, comfort, and silence. The antidote is not more intelligence, but conscious humility, a different way of being, one rooted in awareness, self-honesty, and the courage to question ourselves. Now the question is, what will you do with this? Will you dismiss it as just another interesting video, or will you let it change the way you move through the world? Being one of the few who truly see does not mean being cynical. It means being awake. It means noticing when others are sleepwalking and refusing to join them. It means choosing the discomfort of awareness over the easy pleasure of ignorance. The world doesn't need more clever people. It needs more people who are willing to pause before they act, to ask, is this true? Is this right? Is this mine? Or am I just repeating what I've absorbed? You don't have to be a philosopher or a scholar. You just have to be honest. And honesty, real honesty, is rarer than genius. If you feel something shifting in you after this, hold on to it. Let it shape the way you talk, listen, participate, lead, and even disagree. Because here is the uncomfortable but liberating truth. You have the power to become someone who does less harm simply by being more aware. And in a time when unconscious harm is everywhere, that is its own quiet form of resistance. If this resonated with you, consider subscribing. We explore questions like this every week, not to judge the world, but to understand it, and perhaps, together, to become the kind of people the world quietly needs. Feel free to share your thoughts below, how this landed with you, where you see yourself in this spectrum. This isn't the end of a speech. It's the beginning of a longer conversation between you and me, and the part of you that refuses to remain asleep. There's a quiet power in hearing someone say, I don't it know, not as a performance, and not as self-deprecation, but as a genuine admission. My understanding is limited. I might be missing something. In a world obsessed with certainty, the kind of humility feels almost radical, but it may be the single most important shield we have against stupidity, both our own and the world's. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates became famous for one simple claim, that he was wise only because he knew he was not wise. This wasn't modesty. It was insight. He saw that the greatest danger comes from people who believe they already know everything. His method was built on asking questions that exposed the limits of human understanding, not to humiliate others, but to awaken them. And centuries later, Kierkegaard echoed this, saying that true wisdom begins when a person stands alone before the truth, stripped of crowds, dogma, and pretense, and admits they do not have all the answers. This kind of humility is not weakness. It's courage, because it requires giving up the illusion of control. Humility does something intelligence cannot do. It keeps us open. It keeps us learning, questioning, observing. Without humility, intelligence turns into pride. Without humility, knowledge becomes rigidity, and rigidity leads straight into stupidity, because it refuses to adapt, refuses to reconsider, refuses to hear. Imagine a leader who says, I was wrong. Imagine a parent who apologizes to their child. Imagine a teacher who admits they don't know the answer yet, but they want to find out together. These are not signs of stupidity. They are signs of wisdom. Humility slows us down. It makes us pause before sharing a post, before judging someone, before assuming we're immune to error. It makes us aware of our shadow, the parts of ourselves that, if left unchecked, can cause harm even with brilliant intentions. Importantly, humility is not timidity. It doesn't mean never speaking up or always doubting yourself. It simply means recognizing the limitations of your perspective. It means being willing to revise your views when new evidence appears. It means understanding that every human being, including you, has the capacity to be both wise and stupid at different moments. The philosopher Jiddu Krishnamurti once said, "The ability to observe without evaluating is the highest form of intelligence." But I would add, the ability to observe ourselves without ego, that is the highest form of maturity. In practical terms, this means cultivating habits like reflection, listening deeply, checking your assumptions, surrounding yourself with people who can challenge you, not flatter you. It means resisting the urge to always be right, and instead embracing the discipline of being curious. So as we approach the end of this exploration, we are left with a paradox. The true antidote to stupidity is not being smarter than everyone else. It's being more awake than our own ego. Humility won't make you invincible, but it will make you permeable to truth. And in a world drowning in unexamined certainty, that might be the most dangerous power of all. A few years ago, a brilliant CEO, praised in magazines, revered by investors, led one of the most promising tech companies in the world. He was celebrated as a visionary, a genius, a disruptor, but internally, his own employees whispered about reckless decisions, ignored safety protocols, and a growing culture of arrogance. Eventually, one disastrous choice caused a massive public failure. Stocks crashed. People lost their jobs. The company's reputation collapsed, not because the leader was ignorant, but because he believed he was too smart to fail. This is the tragedy of intelligence. It often creates a false shield against stupidity. Psychiatrist Carl Jung called this the danger of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to see. He believed that the more we identify with our intelligence, our competence, our achievements, the harder it becomes to admit when we're acting foolishly. The ego wants to protect its image at all costs, and in doing so, it creates a dangerous blindness. Jung wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality. To become conscious of it involves recognizing the dark aspects of the personality as present and real." In other words, the smarter we are, the more sophisticated our illusions become. We build elaborate justifications. We rationalize bad behavior. We surround ourselves with people who reinforce our brilliance, and before long, we mistake cleverness for wisdom, a fatal error. Think of how many catastrophes in history were caused not by uneducated masses, but by highly intelligent leaders, economists who destroy economies with complex models, scientists involved in unethical experiments, generals who send thousands to die with flawless strategic plans, yet zero empathy. Philosopher Immanuel Kant warned of this too, distinguishing between cleverness and moral maturity. A person can be extremely smart and still act with profound stupidity if they lack self-awareness, humility, or moral reflection. Intelligence, by itself, is like a sharp blade. It can cut through ignorance, or it can cut down everything in its path, including truth. So why does intelligence fail us? Because intelligence tends to trust itself, and that trust can become arrogance. The moment we are convinced that we are too smart to be wrong, we have stepped into dangerous territory. This is the cognitive trap psychologists call the bias blind spot, the belief that others are biased, but we are objective. This is why some of the most foolish people are not the uneducated, but the highly educated who refuse to question themselves. A university professor can be deeply knowledgeable about literature, yet treat their students with cruelty. A highly trained doctor can prescribe the wrong treatment because they dismiss a simple concern. A philosopher can write about ethics all day and still cheat on their spouse, convinced their brilliance excuses their hypocrisy. Here's the uncomfortable reality. Intelligence makes it easier to justify our stupidity. We use our cleverness to build arguments defending our own behavior rather than examining it. We become trapped in a hall of mirrors, reflecting our own brilliance back at ourselves. So what is the antidote? Not more intelligence, but humility. Humility is the ability to say, I don't know, I might be wrong. Let me look again. It sounds simple, even soft, but it's one of the most radical acts in a culture obsessed with certainty and status. Jung believed that confronting the shadow, seeing the parts of ourselves that are irrational, emotional, foolish, is not a sign of weakness, but of maturity. Only when we acknowledge our capacity for stupidity can we begin to resist it. The truly wise are not those who believe they are above error, but those who believe they are always capable of it. So next time you hear a clever argument, a well-polished speech, or even your own internal reasoning, pause. Ask, is this true, or do I just want it to be true because it flatters me? Because intelligence may help you succeed, but only humility will keep you from becoming dangerous. There's a moment that happens in certain meetings. Maybe you've felt it. Someone says something obviously flawed, or makes a decision that everyone privately disagrees with. You feel a tension in your chest, a desire to speak, but then you look around and no one else seems bothered. People smile, nod, move on. You swallow your concern. You think maybe it's just me. That moment is where collective stupidity begins. Sociologists, from Emile Durkheim to Gustave Le Bon, have long warned that individuals behave differently when submerged in a group. We become less critical, more compliant. We mirror the emotions and opinions of those around us, even when those opinions make little sense. Le Bon called this the psychology of crowds, explaining that once inside the collective mind, the individual loses a part of their rational judgment. But this doesn't just happen in stadiums or protests. It happens in offices, schools, families, entire cultures. We defer not to truth, but to comfort. And in that act of deferring, we contribute to what I'd call a collective fog, a shared state of half-awareness, where everyone follows everyone else, assuming somebody must know what they're doing. The irony is, everyone thinks the same thing, and thus, no one truly thinks at all. Philosopher Søren Kierkegaard once said that the crowd is untruth, not because a crowd is always wrong, but because identity dissolves into imitation. We stop being responsible for our thoughts. We outsource them. We stop being responsible for our courage. We wait for permission. Think of the scandals that erupt years after everyone kind of knew something was wrong. Think of the harmful trends that go unquestioned because that's just how it is. Think of entire regimes and corporations built on silence, disguised as unity. Collective stupidity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It creeps in through polite consensus, through not making a scene, through the deeply human desire to belong. And this is where it becomes deeply personal. Most of us at some point have contributed, not because we're bad people, but because it's uncomfortable to stand out, because there's a primitive safety in conformity. Psychologists call it social proof. We assume that if others accept it, it must be right. It must be acceptable. So we go along. But the price of that comfort is high. Yours and Tzu, when no one thinks independently, we all become less intelligent than we are individually. We participate in decisions we don't believe in. We let stupidity guide the group, even when every silent person in that group knows better. The remedy is not isolation. It's conscious participation. To be in the group, but not swallowed by it. To be the one who raises a hand and says, does this actually make sense? Not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of responsibility. Because collective stupidity doesn't need bad people. It just needs obedient ones. And the hard truth is, we have all been obedient to stupidity at some point by staying silent, by nodding along, by pretending we didn't notice. So the question becomes, at what point do I stop being a passive member of the crowd and start becoming a conscious participant in truth? It was a simple moment, hardly noticeable. A woman stood at a crosswalk, looking down at her phone. Behind her, a child tugged at her coat, asking if it was safe to cross. She mumbled yes, eyes still glued to the screen, but it wasn't safe. A car turned the corner too quickly. The child stepped forward. A stranger saw it unfolding and screamed. Tires screeched. The car swerved. No one was hurt, at least not physically. But for a few seconds, time stood still. Now here's the question. Was the woman bad? Was she evil? Of course not. She didn't wish harm on anyone. And yet, her lack of awareness almost caused it. The danger didn't come from malice. It came from mindlessness. And this is the heart of our first insight. The most dangerous people are often the ones who do not know what they are doing. The Italian economic historian Carlo Cipolla, in his darkly humorous but brutally honest essay, The Basic Laws of Human Stupidity, described stupidity not as a lack of intelligence, but as a tendency to cause harm to others without any personal gain and without awareness. Cipolla mapped out 4 kinds of people: the intelligent, who help others and help themselves; the bandits, who harm others for their own gain; the helpless, who harm themselves while helping others; and the stupid, who harm others and themselves for no reason at all. The stupid, he argued, were the most dangerous because they operate without predictability, logic, or even self-interest. You cannot reason with them. You cannot anticipate them. They are not driven by evil, but by an absence of self-awareness. Nietzsche warned of this too. In a more psychological register, he believed that the real danger to human freedom wasn't evil, but the unthinking herd, the masses who follow convention, tradition, and ideology without ever asking why. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." What both Cipolla and Nietzsche saw, from different angles, is that the people who pose the greatest threats to our lives, our institutions, our collective future, may not even realize they're doing it. They're voting, signing, managing, leading, unaware. They're loving, teaching, parenting, unaware. They're ruining reputations, reinforcing injustice, spreading lies, not because they're malicious, but because they simply don't see. That's what makes this force so dangerous. When evil shows up, we can identify it. We have names for it. We can fight it. But stupidity is quiet. It hides in everyday decisions. It moves through systems. It creeps into our homes. It infects entire cultures, not through violence, but through blindness. And sometimes it's not just them, it sits us. Because here's the brutal truth. We too are capable of this. We've all sent the message without thinking, repeated the opinion we didn't verify, followed the rule we never questioned, laughed at the thing we didn't understand, dismissed the perspective that made us uncomfortable. We've all been that woman at the crosswalk. So what do we do with this? We start by acknowledging that awareness, not just intelligence, is the first shield against harm. And we remember that not all threats wear the face of evil. Some wear the face of someone who means well, someone who's just tired, distracted, following the rules, doing what they were told, not noticing the edge they're standing on. The question is, how often am I that person? How often are you?